Hi, everybody. Welcome once again to the noon meeting of the Rotary Club of Baton Rouge. I'm Club President Haggai Davis. With us today, we have John Pugh will do the invocation, followed by Ken Best for the pledge and the four-way test.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to share with you a brief story explanation of the small prayer that we will use as the introduction for the invocation today. In Northeast New Mexico, there's a scout ranch run by the Boy Scouts of America that encourages young people to spend a week or 10 days camping and hiking in the rugged mountains of northern New Mexico. Philmont Scout Ranch is the name of it. And at the base camp where cadets and campers start and end, there's a large mess hall, and it starts every meal with this Philmont prayer: for food, for raiment, for opportunities, for life, for friendship and fellowship, we thank thee, O Lord. Our Heavenly Father, we hope that the spirit of the Philmont prayer will imbibe in all of us so that we can make healthy decisions during these times of political and economic crisis. Grant us the wisdom and the strength to do the right things during these times of uncertainty, and help us to follow the guidelines of our medical professionals so that we can not only protect ourselves, but protect others. May we have courage to follow the guidelines set by the Centers for Disease Control, and please grant to our elected officials, both local, state, and federal, the power and the authority to make good decisions to bring this tragic pandemic to an end. In doing these things, we fulfill the prophecy of being ever mindful of the needs of others. We ask this in your name. Amen.
Please join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Now join me in the four-way test of the things we think, say, and do. Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned?
Thank you. Thank you, John and Ken. That was great. We have with us today Mr. Paul Hilliard and Stephen Watson are going to be our speakers. We have Robert Levy, who's going to introduce them. Robert, thank you very much for the introduction.
Thank you. The National D-Day Museum opened June 6th of 2000, 55 years after the war ended. It later expanded to become the National World War II Museum. It's exceptional that 20 years after the opening and 75 years after the war ended, we have a decorated veteran of the Pacific and a man who joined the museum 18 years ago and is now president to share their thoughts with us. Paul Hilliard came from rural Wisconsin, where his family farmed, and in 1943, at age 17, he enlisted in the Marines. He wound up flying 45 missions in a Dauntless dive bomber. This two-seater plane had him facing backwards in the open air to fire machine guns and operate the radio. He spoke to us in 2013, and when he was finished, I asked him a question: how could you fire a machine gun with a windshield in front of you? And Paul, as he was on his way to his seat, said, "What windshield?" After the war, he got his undergraduate degree and law degrees and was hired by Chevron in New Orleans. While in school in Texas, he discovered that although Texas was 9 times the size of Louisiana, Louisiana was 9 times more interesting. Thus, he wound up starting a very successful independent oil company in Lafayette, Badger Oil. He has found time to volunteer in major ways to the benefit of many nonprofits, not the least of which is the World War II Museum. Stephen Watson joined the museum in 2002 and has worked in numerous areas that contributed to its success. He continues to keep it as a world-class attraction that honors our greatest generation. We welcome today Paul and Stephen.
Thank you.
Glad to be here. Thank you. All right.
Lead the way, Paul. You're first.
Mine? Okay. Well, I think Louisiana turned out to be a lot more than 9 times more interesting. Maybe 90 times more in ways I never dreamed of. And so it's still that way. But anyway, I was a kid in a big war, one of 16 million Americans, one of 6 million volunteers. And so I did what I was told to do. That made it easy. You get along with the Marine Corps pretty well, as long as when they say jump, you just say how high, and then that's it. And but anyway, I did what I was told to do, and I did my time overseas. And now I read extensively about the war, and I find out what we were doing, what was happening around the world. Big war, 100 million men in uniform. I don't know, 60, 70, 80 million casualties. And so it was, I look at it now as it was a privilege, to wear a uniform and fire a weapon in a war. It was a different kind of war. I think at very sharp moral corners. Everyone knew what we were doing and why we were there. And we didn't know necessarily what we were doing, but we knew why we were there. So I came back and now 75 years after I got out of service, I look back and try to figure out what happened, because it's all kind of a dream. But I think the 15, 16 years I've been associated with the National World War II Museum it's meant a lot. It's been a great privilege, a lot of fun, and most of the time, right now it's not a lot of fun. We having some pressure, as you well know. Stephen can go into that, but anyway, it's a big war on it. It was on every continent, on, over, and under every body of water. A war that introduced the third dimension of warfare, which was the air power, and that began with biplanes and ended with pressurized bombers at 30,000 feet delivering atom bombs. So a lot happened during the war. So with that, rather than just ramble on, I'd like to hear what the audience wants to hear. I'm more interested in that, to hear what questions do they have. So fire away.
Stephen, did you have anything to add as well before? We haven't really had a chance for a whole lot of questions just as of yet.
Sure. I'm always happy to make comments. So a few things I wanted to say. I mean, first thing I want to do is thank my boss, Paul, for, his leadership at the museum. Robert did a wonderful job of describing Paul's wartime experience, but few have done more for the museum than Paul and his wife Madeline over the last 15 years. And Paul was our chairman until just a couple of months ago, from 2018 through 2020, and it's really a lot of our accomplishments at the museum are a testament to his commitment and his leadership. So I want to thank Paul for not only his service, but all that he has done to help the museum become the great institution that it is. I also want to thank Robert Levy. Robert has been a dedicated and loyal supporter of the museum for many years, and also to the club. You have been incredibly generous over the years, giving us an opportunity to come and tell you a little bit about our story and our progress, and we appreciate that. This is a wonderful club, and I think, as I recall, one of the biggest and strongest Rotary clubs in the entire country, and we appreciate the opportunity to come and tell you a little bit about what's happening at the museum. And of course, Baton Rouge is an important community to the museum. It's a great source of visitors, school groups, supporters. We've obviously had great support from the state of Louisiana, going back to the 90s through every administration, including Governor Edwards and his team. So we're very grateful to Baton Rouge and the community and all that it has done and continues to do to support the museum. So just a few things I wanted to mention. I'll start with the tough parts, and I'll end with something a little more positively in terms of what's happened in the last few months and the road ahead. I think it will come as no surprise that it's been a difficult year due to the pandemic. We had, before the crisis began in March, we had 14 years of consecutive visitation growth. We had welcomed over 8 million visitors. We were at about 800,000 visitors a year. A majority of those folks coming from outside of the state, and we were continuing on a positive trajectory. But of course, COVID has put a temporary pause on that momentum, and we anticipate it will be 18 to 24 months at least before we get back to a full recovery. So certainly being our most challenging financial year, a 2-month closure during the busy spring season, the anticipated slow return of tourism. I'm sure many of you in this meeting today are dealing with the same things in your own businesses and life. For us, it's already had a $25 million impact on our financials, and it will be a tough drawback. But we're glad to be open. We opened on Memorial Day. There are not a lot of tourists in New Orleans at this point. We're doing about 15 to 20% of what we would typically expect. And as we have begun our new financial year, which started in July, we think we'll probably end up at about half of what we would have anticipated. So like many organizations, we've made tough decisions. We've made budget cuts. Unfortunately, we've had to go through some layoffs. And make sure that the organization endures. That's the most important. The organization must endure. It will. Just like after Katrina, we will be an important part of driving the recovery in New Orleans. And that was one of the reasons we worked hard to have the opportunity to open in phase 1. I was able to participate on the governor's task force. And I think we made the case that we can open safely. We have wide open spaces. We can do time tickets. We can manage capacity. We know how to clean. We've got security. And really, there's never been a better time to visit the museum. There are no big crowds. There's plenty of space. You can take your time. So if you haven't been recently, I urge you to come and visit. We're doing it safely. And really, I think you can take your time in a way that would not have been possible. So that's certainly an unintended positive of a bad situation. But a couple really, I think, important things that have also happened in the last few months is, going back to the fall, we had opened our Hall of Democracy, one of the final parts of our expansion plan, and that houses 2 new entities at the museum: our Institute for the Study of War and Democracy and our World War II Media and Education Center. And those 2 entities really have deepened our bench of historians and scholars and content experts, and given us new capabilities to produce digital content. And that has become increasingly important during the pandemic, as we've essentially become a virtual organization serving students, teachers, lifelong learners with an array of digital programs. And we've literally touched millions of people since March. So distance learning webinars for schools, teacher training programs, daily oral history features from our digital collections, historical articles, live presentations by educators, curators, and historians. We have a great podcast right now following the last months of the war and the decisions that Truman was faced with, panel discussions with scholars from around the country. And of course, this month, we'll have a number of programs dedicated to the 75th anniversary of the end of the war, which of course will happen in just a few weeks. So that, I think, has been a real positive out of a tough situation, is how our team, just like educational institutions across the country, really had to pivot and think about how to serve audiences virtually. I'm really proud of the work that our team has done in the last 4 months, and I think that will be something that we will continue to sustain even as we come out of the pandemic. We also have another big year ahead of us. We will break ground in the next 60 days on the final permanent exhibition pavilion, our Liberation Pavilion, which will pick up the story near the end of the war, tell the story of the Holocaust, the end of the war, the cost of our victory, and really look at the legacy of the war through the lens of how it changed this country and the world. So that will break ground in, I hope, late September, early October, and be open in 2022. And we'll essentially complete the master plan and the campus that we signed on to more than 15 years ago, and what has been obviously the driving focus of the board and the staff here at the museum. So those are just a few things that I wanted to mention, and with that, I'll pause too, and like Paul said, we can answer any questions that the group might have.
Great. The first question is from Chris Delia for Paul. What theater did you serve in?
Well, like most Marines, I went to the Pacific. They first by ship from San Diego to the Solomons, and in training there, and moved around a couple islands. Ended up on the big island of Bougainville, and then they sent us again by ship first to New Guinea, and as a stop there for I don't know why, but anyway, and from there to a base in the Western Pacific in Coral Atoll, where the fleet gathered for their convoy, really gathered for the invasion of Luzon, the big island in the Philippines. And so we ended up on the Philippines, and we flew out of Luzon until Manila was declared secure, and then we flew down to pretty close to the end of the world, and Zamboanga, Mindanao, which is not exactly a tourist mecca, but and we were there until they sent us home for reassignment just before the war ended, in I think mid to late July of 45. So that was my experience. We were Marine units, dive bombing units, but we had 7 squadrons there. But we were flying for the Army, flying close support the Army infantry.
Tina Holland left a comment for you. Thank you, Mr. Hilliard. Semper Fi from a fellow Marine. She said that we were always the few and the proud. She's very sincerely humbled by your service.
Thank you. Thank you.
And we also have another comment from Richard along the same lines, thanking you for your service and, lifetime debt and gratitude. So thank you again for a lot of our Rotarians are going to love your service. Mr. Stephen, we have a question from Warren Burkett. Are there any plans to expand to other wars or conflicts in any kind of a name change?
No, I don't think there are any plans to expand beyond World War II. I mean, I think we feel that that's a big story, and that's our mission. I think that as we complete the physical campus, I think there are plans to do more to expand how we bring that story to the public, both regionally and nationally. So as we are, getting close to the end of the build out of the physical campus, what we are looking at is how do we do more to serve teachers and students? How do we have a bigger presence in higher education? What are the partnerships that we can form with other organizations that will allow us to do a better job at making sure that this important event in our country's history and world history is not forgotten? So I think our focus right now, as we finish building the campus, is really to think about how we can expand our educational outreach, including taking a hard look at whether or not we may become a degree granting institution, essentially a university of our own, and offer master's degrees in World War II and military history. So I think that's our focus right now. With public programs, with special exhibits, it gives us a little bit more flexibility to look a little bit outside of World War II, but I certainly don't see any significant changes to our focus on the horizon.
Okay, Robert Levy asked Mr. Paul a question. Assuming your pilot had to take evasive actions, how did you feel when you were in the open air?
Cold. It was. We usually, it's the Philippines weather, but like New Orleans in August, and so you were pretty lightly clothed when you took off, but at about 12,000 feet in an open cockpit. I have to tell you, I hated it, but I never minded the dive. I just wanted to get down because it was cold up there, and sometimes we'd circle for maybe a couple hours waiting for the assignment of targets because the planes would go down, one at a time, and so they could observe where the bombs hit, and then they'd call a flight leader, I guess, and tell them, next guy, 100 yards east or west or whatever it was. So they had their own type. We had a Marine pilot always on the ground with the Army, and he was talking to the pilots in the strike force. No, I didn't that circling in that up there in the open cockpit. Just was one of the least enjoyable parts of the deal. But I look back on it. I was fortunate to get the assignment I did. I didn't ask for it. They told me that's what I was going to do, and I was a volunteer, but I didn't have any choice. So you
were voluntold.
Yeah, right. I look back on. I never crawled around the mud or the coral or the jungle and with a rifle. I slept in a tent, and we flew our missions and went back. So looking back on it, compared to what a lot of the other guys did, I had good duties and no complaints there. So
Short Richard asked, why did you choose the Marines as compared to the other services?
I don't know, probably John. No, it wasn't John Wayne, but it was. I don't know. I turned 17 in June of '42, and maybe a couple of weeks after the Battle of Midway, and I read a lot about it and about the SPD and the Dauntless Dive Bomber, and but I don't know. The Marines were appealing. I guess I thought it was a little more exclusive outfit than the Army. Plus, I had two uncles. They're already in the Army, and an uncle in the Coast Guard, and two of those uncles had been based at some time during their training early in the war in Fort Polk, and they condemned the Army for me and Fort Polk. So I said there's got to be something different than this. So being a Wisconsin farm boy, I wasn't all that fond of salt water, so I chose the Marine Corps. And, but I think one of the things that I've never been able to get across, and I think it's a little bit frustrating, is that how ordinary and how normal it was to wear a uniform in 1942 to 1945. I mean, we had 16 million Americans wore a uniform, and we were a nation of about 132 million. So that's 1 out of 8. But when you take the out to women and children. That's, it's 1 out of 4. And so when you end up, you got almost half of the age eligible, medically fit, physically fit men in America wore a uniform. So it was normal. I didn't know anybody that wasn't in uniform, I don't think.
That's fascinating. Thank you for that. Stephen, Marvin Borgmar is asking, do you guys interact with the USF Kid Museum here in Baton Rouge?
We do. That's a good question. In fact, we actually should have had our Pelican State exhibit at the USS Kid right now. We created an exhibit several years ago called Pelican State Goes to War that really, I think, does a great job of talking about Louisiana's contribution to the war effort, both on the home front and through those that served. And it's been traveling the state for the last couple of years, and was scheduled to actually be at the Kid right now. I think it would have opened a few weeks ago, and it would have been there through September. So we're hopeful that will happen again at some point in the future. I've also, had several meetings with their board and their leadership over the last several years, and talking about, lessons learned from our experience growing the museum, and trying to give some helpful advice, and vice versa. So we have a good relationship. We were really looking forward to having our special exhibit be there this summer. So hopefully when we get through the pandemic, we'll be able to revisit that, and that will give us a really, I think, good anchor partnership to hopefully, begin to do more in the future.
And Jeff Zimmerman asked, how can we access the digital information you were talking about earlier?
Yep, great question. Multiple ways. You can go to our website and sign up for our email distribution list, and you'll get more emails than you may want from the National World War II Museum. You can follow us on social media, and you can also go to our digital collections website, which is www.online.org. www.online.org. That's where all of our digital collections exist, and I think there's maybe 2,500 hours of veteran testimony there right now, and we're adding more literally every week. But I think between signing up for our emails, following us on social media, and going to that site, you'll get a really robust understanding of kind of the daily programming that we're putting out there. In fact, tomorrow we'll have a live event with Chris Wallace, the Fox News correspondent. He actually has a new book out on the last, I think, from FDR's death to the bombing on Hiroshima. And our senior historian, Rob Citino, will do an interview with him about his new book next week. So that's just an example of tomorrow. That's an example of the type of programming that we're doing.
So Barbara Carey has asked, what volunteer opportunities does the museum have?
Many. Volunteers are an essential part of the museum and have been since the day that we opened. We have an active volunteer corps of over 450. Right now, like everything else, we are being very careful about how we bring our volunteers back into the museum. We want to make sure that we do it safely, but just about every aspect of our daily operations involve volunteers at guest services, docents, helping at our Beyond All Boundaries Theater. They are throughout the campus, really helping our visitors. We also have volunteers that help us with the restoration of our artifacts, that come and work with our curators. We have a dedicated crew of volunteers that have put together projects like our PT 305 boat that until very recently was operating in Lake Pontchartrain. And again, if you go to our website, you will see there how you can sign up and get in touch with us to become a volunteer. But I would say the majority are involved in the front of house operations, and we've had a number of volunteers from Baton Rouge. In fact, a World War II veteran who passed away a few years ago, John Rogers, was a dear friend of mine, and he and his wife T would come down and be in the U.S. Freedom Pavilion on Thursdays, as I recall, every week. And I know that was a real highlight of the last years of his life, was coming from Baton Rouge to be a volunteer at the museum. And we still have about 25 World War II veteran volunteers at the museum as well.
So, Mr. Hilliard, certainly somebody who was way too young to have any kind of knowledge of the day-to-day life in World War II. What was a typical day like for you while you were serving down in the South Pacific?
Well, we had 6 to a tent, and we hire a Filipino houseboy to help do laundry and stuff like that. But it was somewhat primitive because not only because we were in the Philippines, but because the Philippines had been under Japanese occupation, Luzon, until the Army, until they landed in January 45, and we came just a few days after that. But the CBs scraped out an airfield in a rice field, and we were in between, coconut plantations, and they laid this what they call Marston matting, the metal strips with they laid down sections with the holes in it, and that was it. But it was we had no libraries and TV, so it was mainly it was interpersonal discussion, and sit around and complain about the officers and the food and everything else, and talk about girls, about which we knew very little, and about the next possible beer ration, which we got once a month. And but it was not exactly exciting times, except when we were flying.
And how often did you fly?
Whenever we're told. It's just being dive bombers, you had to have decent visibility of the target, and so we flew in pretty good weather. At least we thought it was pretty good when we took off. It didn't always end up that way, but we just flew whenever I guess the Army notified them they wanted us to attack a target, and it was sporadic. We had no control or no foreknowledge of that. They'd just say, "You're flying today," and they'd run a truck by and put you in the back end of it and go to the flight line and assign your airplane and go do it. And so it was there was nothing scheduled, about it. We never knew what day we were going to fly or where we were going. But most of our missions we called Columbus missions, because when we took off, we didn't know where we were going. And when we got to the target, we didn't know where we were, but we tried to make a big mess. And when we got home, we still didn't know where we'd been. We did it all at government expense. So we said, the guys were laughing, but we refer to those as government missions. I mean, the Columbus missions.
We have another question from Marvin Borgmeyer. Did you have any close calls?
I suppose you dive from 12,000 feet, nearly vertical, and start pull out at about 1,500, and so between one of the concern was we had pretty light anti-aircraft fire, and Jap aircraft had been pretty much eliminated by then, but our ground fire was always interesting. But I think we flew into some targets in some very rugged terrain, which is while we were there. We were in fact airborne artillery, and it had been very difficult to bring up artillery because of the terrain. So we could attack it from the air. So, and I found out a lot more about what we were doing after the war and reading about the adventures in the Philippine campaign. So, but no, the dive bombers are a unique way to do. You don't deliver bombs. You don't drop the bombs. You deliver them. You fly them to the target, and what terrain permitting, the pilot would bank and circle the target. We'd strafe it, and but frankly, when you're moving at 200 knots and you've just dropped a series of bombs, you can't really see much of what you're doing. And so, but we strafed it anyway. And I remember one of the guys saying when he got back, he says, well, I don't know what I was doing. I was strafing with those twin 30 caliber machine guns, and he said, I don't know what I hit. He said, well, the guy assured him, said, look, if it's worth a bomb, it's worth a bullet, so don't worry about it. Just strafe it.
And so were you mostly in the Philippines, or did you go through any of the other islands further up north?
No, we they sent us home for reassignment in July '45, and mind you, the battle even for Okinawa was over with, so they were preparing for the invasion, and they flew us from Zamboanga to Guam, and I saw little Guam from the air from that transport, and it was Guam's this pretty big island. It was military stuff. It was tents. It was thousands and thousands of barrels, trucks, jeeps, Quonset huts loaded with supplies. So they were as they prepared for the invasion. But they sent us home, and while I was home on leave, they dropped the bombs. We didn't really know what that was at the time. But I think the night I got home to Wisconsin, they dropped the second one, and a week later, the Japs said that's enough. And the next morning, I woke up on my mother's lawn, so I guess we celebrated.
Well, that's amazing to have lived through all of that, and glad you're still around to tell us these stories.
Well, me too. But I frankly, when I'm in New Orleans at the museum and I look up at that dive bomber, it's sort of a fantasy because it's so long ago, and I've been out of the Marine Corps now for over 74 years, so it's but I have to read about it. Then it comes back. It's none of it is. I didn't carry much of it with me, but I want to read about it, and when I read about it a lot, and it was it's very interesting time in my life.
Well, again, I'm so thrilled to have had both of you gentlemen here with us today. Anything that you, or we just had another question from Rob Wise. Wants to know, do you have any favorite parts or places that are in the museum?
Well, I think the road to Tokyo is means a lot to me because that's where I served. But I enjoy that, and I can relate to the jungle and all that, and the just when there's a part of that exhibit, and it must have what a 20, 25, 30-foot ceiling, and it's so mindful of the Pacific, which seems like the Pacific is endless. So a third of the Earth's surface, and out there everything was distance. And I remember we were aboard ship on the way to the Philippines, and one of the guys saying, find out from one of the officers what we can write to Mom and tell her. And he came back. He said, tell Mom that you're at least 1,000 miles from where you were, and you're at least 1,000 miles from where you were going. Then she'll know exactly where you are.
That's great.
But, I've enjoyed the museum. I mean, that's been a labor of love, and give me something to do. And I think, and maybe Stephen was going to mention, but I want to thank the state of Louisiana, which has been so helpful going back all the way back into the 90s, I guess, to Mike Foster, they've helped us and given us seed money for the buildings. And of course, then they say, well, it's like a challenge grant. They say, okay, now you go raise the rest of the money and do it within a certain length of time. But it's been helpful. So the state of Louisiana has been very, very, very good to us.
And I've enjoyed every time I've gone. I love going to the museum. There's always something new every time I'm there and just learning something about what you guys went through, and that's, thank you for being a part of putting it all together for us.
It's well, there's some challenges right now from different directions, economic. As you know, New Orleans is a tourist and convention town, so it's hurting right now, and then the social unrest is not particularly helpful either.
So, gentlemen, is there anything else that you'd like to let us know about or for the day?
I do have there was a couple of questions in the chat that I thought I should probably address. One of them was my last visit to the museum was just after the Boeing edition. Have there been any other editions since then? And absolutely, there have. Since the Boeing U.S. Freedom Pavilion, the Boeing Pavilion opened in 2013. We opened the Road to Tokyo that Paul just talks about, but also the Road to Berlin, which is our galleries dedicated to telling the story of the whole war in Europe. We also have now our Arsenal of Democracy permanent exhibition, which really I think helps the visitor understand how we got into the war in the first place, the lead up to the attack on Pearl Harbor, and also an expanded treatment of the home front story. So we have added much since 2013, and really, in fact, in many ways, it's like a whole new museum experience. And I would also just add to the question about the favorite part of the museum. I think this museum started with the 650 oral histories that Dr. Ambrose had collected as part of his research and writing on D-Day primarily. And to this day, I think one of the signature elements of visiting the museum is how we tell the story through the words and the experiences of men and women like Paul who served. And I think if you have not visited in the last 5 years, you have not experienced what we call our dog tag experience, which is when you come to the museum and you get your ticket, you're also given a little dog tag that has an RFID chip in it, and you begin your visit at the museum probably the same way that Paul began his journey to war, is you get on a Pullman train car and you take your dog tag and you swipe it and you're introduced to a real person. And as you go through the road to Berlin or the road to Tokyo, you check in and find out what was happening to that person at that period of the war through a series of videos. You can also use that dog tag to digitally collect content as you go through the museum. And when you go home, you take that card, you type in the number to the website, you get the full story of that person's experience, you see all of the material that you collected while you were on site, and we also share with you related materials from the museum's archives. And I think it's just one of the ways that we kept these personal experiences at front and center for the visitor. And I think that's one of the things that I really love about the museum, and one of the things that we get the most positive feedback on.
That's awesome.
Well, I think, Stephen, I think that the new Hall of Democracy, which opened less than a year ago, is an absolutely amazing facility, and the broadcast, the media center in that is worth seeing. Even though I don't understand all of what they do there, but it's an incredible operation. That's good. That's the future of the museum, is the educational aspect, getting it online, getting it out, because we've had 8 million visitors and since it opened, and we can accommodate about maybe 1 million a year comfortably. But there's 330 million people in America, so we've got to get the museum online, get it out to people.
Yeah.
So you mentioned something about the educational components of it. Are you working with any specific universities to do this, or?
It's a great question. So we, we've long had a partnership with the University of New Orleans because essentially, our founders, came out of the University of New Orleans, and we continue to have a great partnership there. We also have a great partnership with Nichols, my alma mater, and we offer a couple of leadership programs for students where you can get college credit through Nichols. And we also have an online master's degree right now with Arizona State University. We have 200 master's students enrolled in classes right now, and we launched that program about 18 months ago, and are continuing to look at other partnerships, and as I mentioned earlier, even the possibility of becoming an accredited degree granting institution as a museum. And to Paul's point about the Hall of Democracy, I mentioned this earlier, but I think one of the really brilliant parts of the physical campus master plan was this understanding that we needed to have a place to produce digital content. We needed to have a significant research library, and to become a trusted source and to help make this story accessible, you have to have historians and scholars and experts that know the history. And the Hall of Democracy that opened last October is the physical building where all of that happens. The library, the historians, the instructional designers, the distance learning experts, the media producers. And as I mentioned earlier, as we finished the campus, being really sort of strategic and thoughtful about how we scale those programs to serve students and teachers across the country, provide more access to our collections in these oral histories, partner with more universities and other organizations will be an important part of our efforts and outreach, in addition to, of course, maintaining the campus. And even today, on average, we reach almost 1 million people per month through our outreach programs, and that is growing exponentially, and that will be an increased focus in the years ahead.
So we have another question from Ken Best, from Mr. Paul. Where did you do your aviation training, and what was your total number of flight hours?
Well, they sent me from San Diego after recruit training and rifle range, and that they sent us to Jacksonville, Florida, the Naval Air Station. We did aviation and radio and radar school there, and then gunnery school, and flew in patrol bombers and did gunnery in the Bahamas and Cuba and so on, combination training flights and anti-submarine flights. And then from there, they sent us back to San Diego and overseas. And I wanted to say, someone mentioned the atom bomb. I just finished Chris Wallace's book, which was interesting. But when they sent us home in late July '45, they said you're going back for reassignment, and we assumed we'd be going back to the Pacific. So that needless to say, the A-bombs and the Japanese surrender was welcome to those of us who just had come home and thought we'd have to go back.
So did you receive any medals for your service, and if so, how many?
Well, the Marine Corps, not very romantic, but they sent me a couple of distinguished rank crosses and some air medals after the war, and they mailed them to my mother's house, and so I don't know why, but because our air group given the naval unit citation in both the Philippine and both the Luzon and the Mindanao operations. So maybe that's why they did. I don't know. I didn't have any formal ceremony. They just sent them to me.
And Stephen, there's a couple of questions from Marvin about can you pick someone's name who may be related to you for a dog tag, and also how many people total work at the museum?
So what was the first question again, just to me?
Can you pick someone's name who you may have been related to when you're doing the dog tag?
Got it. No, you cannot. There are 50 individuals that we selected for the dog tag experience that essentially cover, a majority of the different types of experiences that happened in the war. Of course, you can't boil World War II down to 50 individual experiences, but in terms of branch of service, theater of operations, race, gender, it's a representative group of individuals that have great stories to tell. Some of these are very tough stories. Some of these individuals are killed during the war. But each of them, there are two sets, one that relates to the European theater, one that relates to the Pacific. And when you come to the museum, you are randomly assigned a person, but you can go in and actually look through the 50. And if you see an experience that's maybe closer to your interest, you can essentially pick that person and follow it. How many people work at the museum? Well, that's changed a lot in the last few months, unfortunately. But pre-COVID, between our museum team, our food and beverage partners who manage those operations, and of course, we have a brand new Higgins Hotel and Conference Center that just opened in the last part of 2019. We had almost 600 people working on our campus every single day. And as I mentioned earlier, over 450 volunteers that give at least 4 hours of their time every week. That number is much lower right now. We had to lay off about 1/3 of our staff as we, looked at the realities of, the impacts of the pandemic and what we anticipate will be a challenging recovery. But in many ways, we're fortunate. There will be as many as a quarter of the museums in this country probably not come out of this. That's what we hear at this point. And I know that as we get into the later stages of the recovery, we will be able to build back this team. And my hope is in the next 2 to 3 years, we'll get back to those numbers that we had pre-COVID.
Another question from Marvin. Are you aware of the LPB interview project on World War II veterans?
Yes, absolutely. And we've had a great partnership with LPB over the years. We've actually produced a couple of documentaries with Beth and her team. So we absolutely are. Yes.
That's great. Gentlemen, cannot thank you enough for your time and stories and information you've shared with us today. On behalf of the Rotary Club of Baton Rouge, I just want to say thank you again for both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's been great.
Have a great day. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to invite you once again next Wednesday, August 12th. The Rotary Club, our speaker will be Scott Alswang. He's going to talk to us about the secrets of the United States Secret Service. And then coming up on August 19th, we'll be doing a blood drive back at Drusilla, and you'll be getting more information about that. Please come out and donate some blood. That being said, thank you all very much for attending. Have a great day.